28-3, 28-3, 28-3. That's all poor Falcons fans had to hear about for an entire offseason. This legendary, epic Super Bowl choke job. And it was. It absolutely was. It was an epic choke on a grand scale. And looking at how 2016 played out, with the MVP season you got from Matt Ryan, the big-time production you got out of guys like Vic Beasley, all these, epic career type of years out of these guys, looking at they would get a tougher schedule in 2017, looking at the stigma that comes with being potentially the Super Bowl loser and having a bit of a hangover, and specifically looking at the way that team lost that Super Bowl, and then factoring in losing offensive coordinator Kyle Shanahan, who went on to be the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, I was not that high on the Atlanta Falcons this year. And a little bit of an admittance of my mistake. I've even worn black and red. Just for you Falcons fans. Because before the season started, in my season preview, I said this Falcons team was going to be 7-9. And granted, when you look at the entirety of the body of work, it's not that crazy what I ultimately said. This was a team that had 6 wins by 7 points or less, so they won quite a few close games. They had those early season offensive struggles with Steve Sarkisian, where his play calling didn't even look like it was worthy of USC or a mid-major college program, let alone the National Football League, meaning not for long if you keep calling crappy game plans like that. This was still a team with the lucky win the opening week against the Bears, and it was a lucky win. And then a couple of weeks later, that game in Detroit with that controversial ending with Golden Tate and the fumble at the goal line. This was a team that was 6-5 heading into December. So it could have easily been something like 4-7 at that point. So while all the Falcons fans are surely going to take to the comments of this video and gloat about how wrong I was and how stupid I was and how dare I doubt this team, you were this close, and in the NFL, oftentimes, it is this close. The margins are razor thin. You were this close to being ass wrong and me being that correct. That said, wrong is wrong. And no matter what context I can put on it, and there's plenty of context I can put on it, and I just did, the fact is I was wrong, ding dong, that's wrong. So I have to own it. I have to eat it. It's that simple. And it's largely because they went 3-2 the last month. And even when they were 6-5 heading into December, I'm looking at this team, what did they have left? They had the Minnesota game. You had 2 games against New Orleans, who were one of the better teams in the league. Carolina, who was a really good team. I mean, you had 4 out of the 5 games that were against really good teams. And then that Tampa game, which is a divisional rival on Monday night. You never know what can happen. That December stretch was pretty brutal for the Falcons. And I think ultimately it speaks to the leadership and quality of coach that is Dan Quinn, that this team was able to do what they did and handle their business when they needed to. That's the way I look at it. Excuse me, they were 7-4 heading into December, whatever the hell. You get the point. The point I'm getting at here is this was a team that was really teetering on the edge of the season really being lost. And even if they were, it was 7-4 heading in December. My mistake. I misspoke. Even as you look at that, the razor margin between having a winning record, having a loser record, being in the playoff race, and for all intents and purposes being out, it's so razor thin. And the fact that Dan Quinn was able to keep this team together, hold them in place just enough with a somewhat down year from Matt Ryan and so forth. This is a fortunate team in the sense of they were able to keep most of their key players healthy pretty much all year long. They were really lucky in that sense, and it worked out well for them. But 3-2 in the month of December in that closing stretch of schedule, a brutal stretch of schedule, was a job well done. And it ultimately allowed the Atlanta Falcons to finish 10-6, sneak into the playoffs as the 6th seed in the NFC, where anything could happen. And it almost did. You go into Los Angeles, and you get up 13-0 on the Rams early, and you really never look back. Then the next week, as you're going through that game with Philadelphia against that tough defensive front, You know, Atlanta's in that game at the very, very end. They had a chance to win it in the last minute. And then you could potentially start to think about, holy crap, this is a team as a 6th seed that could go and win road games 3 consecutive weeks and get to the damn Super Bowl. But ultimately, Steve Sarkisian struck one more time. Let's line up our fullback out wide on our most important play of the season on 4th and goal from the 2-damn-yard line, because this is the best 2-point conversion play we have, is basically what you're saying. We're going to line up the fullback out wide on the left side and isolate him. And then we're going to roll out our less than athletically inclined quarterback to the right side and cut off half the damn field. Unbelievable. Steve Sarkisian struck one last time. And no matter how much Dan Quinn tried, and he tried in that game, he just couldn't overcome the handicap that was Steve Sarkisian play calling. Period. So it was an ultimately disappointing end for the Atlanta Falcons. But I will say this, is even though 2016, 28-3 choke job aside, that's an incredibly successful season. 11-5, winning the division, going to the Super Bowl, getting up on the Patriots 28-3, bitch slapping them and owning them in the playoffs like few teams ever could say they have. To come back that next year with lesser offensive play calling, a lesser performance by your quarterback, a lesser performance by Julio Jones because of that system, lesser performances by Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, lesser performance, honestly, it felt like at times from that defense, to be able to get this team to within a whisker of the NFC Championship game was outstanding work by Dan Quinn, and I truly mean that. Because it was incredible stuff. This was not a playoff team the way I felt. But they got what they needed to get at the end of the year, and they got some momentum. They were going to be a scary team in the playoffs, and they almost knocked the Eagles out, and they probably would have beat the Vikings at that point in time. Because you go on the road and you beat the Rams, and then you beat the Eagles. The Vikings aren't going to be any different. Even if you have to go there, you've already done it. Now you get to play on the turf in Minneapolis in the NFC Championship game. They probably would have blew out the damn Vikings too. So, disappointment for the Atlanta Falcons, but it should still be heartened by the fact that this team made it back to the playoffs in the face of so many things. But when you look at this offseason now, it's going to be tough. You don't have a ton of cap space, like $10 million right now. You got some free agents like Dontari Poe, Adrian Claiborne, Matt Bryan, Taylor Gabriel, Courtney Upshaw, Derek Coleman. So there's going to be some tough decisions. You can't keep everybody, in theory. And some guys are going to stay or some guys are going to go. And furthermore, when you look ahead for this organization, 2018 feels like it's really going to be a pivotal year, and this is going to be a pivotal offseason because you're getting ready to enter the last year of Matt Ryan's contract, the last year of Jake Matthews' contract, the last year of Tevin Coleman's contract, and the last year of Grady Jarrett's contract. And those are 4 guys, if you're the Falcons, you feel like you do not want to lose, especially in the case of Ryan Matthews and Grady Jarrett. Maybe you feel like Tevin Coleman is replaceable, but do you really want to take the risk of trying to replace him at this point? So you're going with 4 guys you really don't want to lose heading into the last year of their deal where you already don't have a ton of salary cap space and you have some other key guys you got to keep in free agency. This is going to be tough work for the Atlanta Falcons to figure out over the course of the next year how to get everything done. And there may very well be some tough decisions to be made and will be made. And I'll be curious to see how this all plays out. So, for this team, the draft, just like it is for everybody in theory, but especially because of the circumstances and situation, you have a team that is this close to potentially being a championship team. With all the potential changes that could come in the future and coming up against the salary cap in future years, they really got to hit it hard in the NFL draft and they got to do well. The challenges for the Atlanta Falcons is honestly, they don't have a ton of team needs. They really don't. There are needs, although it's funny because Falcons fans, whenever I talk about their team needs, no matter what I say, it's always fucking wrong. It's whatever. But it is what it is. But again, it is really tough because it's not necessarily a need of needing a bunch of starters. It's more like depth guys and looking to head to the future and so forth. But in terms of what I envision for their needs, I feel like right guard, right tackle, one of those spots, especially maybe right guard, that might be the weakness of an otherwise pretty good offensive line. Maybe that's something that could be addressed in round number 1. I look at that nose tackle position. You've got both Dontari Poe and Atia Rubin are free agents. They may be able to keep one. They may not be able to keep both of them. They may not be able to keep either one of them ultimately. And for the type of system that Dan Quinn runs, he needs that big 320, 330-pound body in the middle. And Dontari Poe wasn't terrible, but I feel like they could upgrade there. I feel like they could also use an upgrade at corner. For some reason, Falcons fans are just smitten with their secondary, and at times they play well, and at times they don't. And in the NFL, is there a law against having too many damn corners or too many damn safeties? Hell no! They could use that. But I also feel like they could invest a day 1 or day 2 pick at wide receiver. Julio Jones is one of the best in the business. Mohamed Sanu is a solid number 2. Taylor Gabriel, though, is a free agent. Justin Hardy, guy that I like coming out of East Carolina, occasionally shows a flash of being a slot weapon, but not consistently enough. Same thing to me with Taylor Gabriel. Could they look at somebody like an Anthony Miller from Memphis in round 2 or round 3? And could he be that type of guy that would bring another element to that passing game for Matt Ryan? Again, though, it's really hard because on the surface, they like what they have in their linebacking core, and they're not going to change it. And they don't really necessarily need to change it a ton there. You look at their defensive line. You've spent first-round picks on guys, in pass rush situations for sure, like Vic Beasley and Takkarist McKinley. You've got Grady Jarrett there in the middle, so you can get after the quarterback. Offensively, you've still got a franchise guy at Matt Ryan at quarterback, one of the best wide receivers in the business. In Julio Jones, one of the best 1-2 running back tandems in the league. In Freeman and Coleman. There's not a ton of needs there, and that's part of the challenge and the trick for the Falcons. In the good sense, they don't have a ton of needs. In a bad sense, they don't have a ton of needs. So it becomes tough to find ways to improve the team other than figuring out how to get more out of the guys that you have. And at some point in time, you might get to a point where your ceiling is only such with the roster that you have and the configuration that it is. But, again, for the Atlanta Falcons, while 2017 didn't get them back to the Super Bowl, I feel like it was still a successful season, even though it was really, really close to not being that. And I was not as far away from being right as many of you are going to make me. Ultimately, I was wrong, and I held up my bargain. I was a man of my word, and that's why Dan Quinn was my coach of the year, because with the circumstances and the situations, I feel like he really deserved it for this performance this year.